Okay, thank you, Buzz. And thank you, Jack and Suzette and Buzz, for putting this together and inviting me to participate. I was asked to say something about Eric in about 10 or 15 minutes, and I'd have to be honest, I've struggled with what to say because there's so many things I'd like to say. Of course, we've heard a lot already. Um, but there are a couple points that I want to make. Um, one of them, I've known Eric well. I met him well over 30 years ago. I can't remember exactly when I met him, but we were involved in a number of committees, like the U.S. National Committee for Inqua. He, of course, was president of AMQA from 2005 to 2007 and handed it over to me in 2007. But it seemed like we were at a lot of conferences together. The common denominator was we'd always go out and have a good beer after a meeting and a lot of conversations about the Quaternary. But there were two things that really stood out when I thought about this. And one is that Eric was a mensch. And it's a Yiddish term for someone who is a very fine human being. And that's how I remember Eric. And a great sense of humor. The other point that I wanted to make was that people remember him as a palynologist, and some of my colleagues were palynologists, and I'm not slighting them. That they spend a lot of time looking under a microscope, and they know a tremendous amount about pollen, and which is remarkable. And Eric was good at that as well, but he was always very interested in context. There was the context of the pollen record and the bigger picture. And he had a great appreciation for landscape evolution, soil, stratigraphy, geochronology. I would consider him a Renaissance man in the Quaternary world. And so I have a picture of him here on the screen. This is an example of that. This is the Canorado archaeological site in western Kansas, right on the border with Colorado. And this was probably around 2005, 2006, somewhere in there. And we were excavating the site, and Eric knew I was out there, and he asked if he could stop by and see it, of course. So this is a picture of him standing in front of one of the sections. And I said to Eric, I said, "So Eric, can you see a buried soil in the stratigraphic section?" If we can have the next slide. Yep, there it is. So Eric got it right, and was very proud of the fact that he was able to point out the buried soil. So on the next slide, this is one you saw a little bit earlier that George Jacobson showed that I took of Eric. This is outside Parker's Pit, just a little bit upslope from it. And so Eric invited me to get involved in the research at Parker's Pit about 3 summers ago. And despite the fact that I have two fears, one is heights and the other is tight spaces, he managed to talk me into going down the shaft in Parker's Pit. And his feeling was that they needed somebody to look at the stratigraphic context of in this case, a paleontological record. And so, as I said, he managed to talk me into going down this shaft. Next slide. And this is him going before me. I think Russ Graham took this photograph. And unfortunately, you can't see his face, but I remember him saying, well, if he could do it, I could do it. So I did follow him down this shaft. It's about somewhere 20 to 30 foot straight drop. And the next slide. This is at the bottom in Parker's Pit. And if you look in the background, you can actually see Eric bent over, looking down into an excavation unit. Looking at the stratigraphy. And so this was actually my first collaboration with Eric in the field, and unfortunately a relatively short one. Of course, the pandemic came along, and the last two seasons were the last two seasons were canceled. Yeah. So anyway, the next slide. So this is really how I want to remember Eric as a very good friend, a very close colleague as well. And so in October, the Geological Society of America meeting is going to be held in Portland, Oregon. It's going to be a hybrid meeting. They're going to allow presentations in person, as well as they're going to have a virtual component of it. And so Kathy Whitlock and Julie Brigham-Gruddy and I have organized a session as a tribute to Eric. Many of you who are watching this have agreed to give presentations. We were looking for people who've worked with him and could talk about some of that collaborative effort. And also, it would be nice to have particularly some early career scientists involved who have been strongly influenced by Eric. And so I don't know the exact date, but it'll be somewhere in that window between the 10th and the 13th of October. So if you're interested, reach out to me or to Kathy or Julie and let us know. So as I said, Eric had a really good sense of humor, and so I thought I would end with a funny story. At least I think it's funny. So in 2006, the Plains Anthropological Association was having its annual meeting in Topeka, Kansas, and Eric was going to be there. I knew that he was presenting a paper, and so I mentioned to him that there was a marsh in central Kansas that I had discovered a floating peat mat on it, and that it would be a great opportunity perhaps to get a pollen record out of the Central Great Plains. And so Eric was never one to pass up an opportunity like that. And so he loaded up his equipment on his trailer and drove it down to Kansas, attended the Plains Conference, and after that, we loaded his trailer onto my truck, and we drove down to Pratt, Kansas. And my son came along, and the three of us got out on this peat mat and took a core. Unfortunately, the core was the peat mat was only about a meter thick, so that was rather unfortunate. And so after we got all the equipment unloaded, we were putting the trailer back onto the truck, and we had been given permission to go out onto the site because it was managed by the Kansas Parks and Wildlife. And the ranger there told us we could park on the side by this marsh. It was on private property. It was actually owned by the regional director of Kansas Parks and Wildlife. He said he would talk to him, let him know what we were doing. And so, just before we were getting ready to leave, the sheriff pulled up, and along with the landowner whose property we were parked on, and they wanted to know what we were doing out there. Well, I said, my colleague, and I turned around and I looked out to where Eric had been, but he was gone. I said, well, I do have a colleague here, and we were taking this pollen core, and we thought we had permission. Unfortunately, the other Parks and Wildlife person had forgotten to tell the landowner that we were going to be parking there. And long story short, I was able to convince the sheriff not to arrest me. And but I was still kind of wondering where Eric was. And so after they left, Eric pops up from behind the truck. He'd been hiding there. And so I always kidded him that I had the keys to the truck And had they arrested me, it would have been a long walk back to Illinois. So we often joked about that, especially over a beer. So I wanted to share that story with you. And as I said, looking at this photograph of the two of us, this is really how I want to remember Eric, a dear friend and a very dear colleague. So I'm going to end on that note. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rolf. That was a great story. And I definitely look forward to the hybrid / in-person form of the GSAs here in Portland. And I look forward to doing some more survey work to figure out how to best toast Eric for the after party. So,
Right. Yeah. Can I add one thing about that?
please do.
Yeah, we are going to try to arrange to have a gathering at one of the microbrews after the session to have a tribute to Eric. And I should add that Eric and we actually had an agreement. I had told him that if I died before him, that he would organize a gathering of my friends to have some really good beer somewhere. And he said, "Well, as long as you do that for me." So I have a pact with him that I've got to honor. I certainly am delighted to do that. So hopefully we can all get together after the session and have a beer and